Hey, I'm Karen and I created this video about input validation using while loops. This video will give you examples of when you might need to use a while loop and show you step-by-step instructions of how to do so. We'll also briefly discuss do while loops, comparing and contrasting them with while loops so you can choose which loop is right for you. Why use a while loop? While loops are very useful for input validation. If we ask the user to enter their age, -19 would not be a valid answer, while 21 would be. The while loop structure uses the keyword while and places arguments inside parentheses. Arguments examples are while num is less than 0 and num is greater than 100, or while found equals false. Enclose following instructions in curly braces. Remember, you do not need to use a semicolon after your while statements. Let's first look at an example where using a while loop would be useful. We're going to import java.util.scanner, declare our class, public class example, declare our main, public static void main string args. Inside our main, I'm going to declare our scanner object, scanner keyword equals new scanner system.in. Then I'm going to ask the user for input, system.out.println. I'm going to ask the user to enter your age. Then I'm going to store age in int equals keyboard.next int. Then we're going to use a while loop. So while age is greater than 0, we're going to print out every year that they've been alive. So system.out.print age plus a hyphen, and then we're going to decrement age. Let's compile it, run it. It says enter your age, let's say 10. There you go. Input validation using a while loop. A while loop can be very useful for validating input. In our previous example, we used two while loops, one while input is invalid and one while input is valid. The user will be stuck in the first while loop until they enter valid data. You must ask the user to re-enter input each time and store input in the appropriate variable. This ensures that any commands listed after the initial while loop will only be executed once proper input is entered. Let's look at our previous example where we used a while loop to print out every year someone's been alive. If we run it again, let's say this time we enter age that's less than 0. If we say -10, nothing happens. To fix this, we can go back into our code and use a while loop, another while loop, for input validation. So we can say while age is less than 0, so any, or less than or equal to 0. So any age 0 and below, we're going to tell the user invalid age, please enter your age. Then we're going to store age again, age equals keyboard.next int. Now we can compile it, run it, and now if we enter, say, -5, this is invalid age, please enter your age. -10, invalid age, please enter your age. Let's say 7. There you go. While versus the do while. The while loop is a pretest loop. It checks the validity of data before ever executing the commands in the loop. Used when you need to validate existing conditions before performing any actions. The do while loop is a post-test loop. It checks the validity of data after executing the commands in the loop one time. Used when you need to perform initial actions and then validate how many remaining times to loop. Very useful for input validation because initial requests for user data can be put inside the do while loop. An if statement is often used inside the do while loop to print out additional commands if data entered is invalid. The do while loop structure uses the keyword do and opens curly braces for commands. After closing the curly brace, use keyword while and place arguments inside the parentheses. You do need a semicolon after your while statements for do-while loops. Let's again refer back to our first example where we only use one while loop to print out the age without input validation. So we're going to run that so that if we enter our age in this one, -9, nothing happens and the program executes. To use input validation with a do-while loop, I'm going to declare our int age up here. Then we'll start the do loop. Get rid of this int declaration. So we're going to do while age is less than or equal to 0. And the do while loop ensures that it goes through the loop at least one time, so that's where we can ask the user to enter their age and save age. Then we need an if statement inside our do while loop that says if age is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to tell the user invalid input. That way when we compile it, run it, if we enter a non-valid age, so -9, it's going to say invalid input, enter your age, and it's going to keep going through the do while loop as long as the age we enter is less than 0. So let's enter 0. Still says invalid input, enter your age, so let's enter 8, and it finally prints it out. In your code, decide what data you need to validate. Make sure you know the range and types of data that are expected in your code. Decide which loop to use. Make sure you format your chosen loop properly. Parentheses, semicolons, curly braces, etc. You now have all the information on choosing the right do or do while loop. Good luck.